The gavel cracked through the low murmur of the courtroom like a rifle shot. Case number 24P117, Lawson versus Monroe, the clerk called, voice flat, practiced. Petitioners, Daniel and Linda Lawson. Respondent, Elise Monroe. I sat at the respondent's table, hands folded on the worn wood, feeling the faint vibration every time someone shifted behind me on the creaking benches. Old heater, old floor, old town. Maple Falls Courthouse smelled like dust, winter coats, and burnt coffee. To my left, Evelyn's leather briefcase rested by her chair, neat tabs peeking from an organized file. To my right, the blue-tabbed folder my grandmother had once pressed into my hands lay closed, its edge aligned with the table's. I'd aligned it 3 times already. Across the aisle, my parents' lawyer lounged like he was on a talk show. Richard Gable. Perfect hair, too white smile. Navy suit that was trying too hard in a county courtroom. He leaned in to whisper something to my parents. They both smiled, the smug, satisfied kind that had haunted the edges of my childhood. My father adjusted his tie, glancing around to see who was watching. My mother smoothed her skirt, lips already shaped into a practiced pout. To them, this was a performance. To me, this was evidence. The judge walked in, black robe, steel gray hair, tired eyes that had seen too many families tear themselves apart over land and money. All rise, the bailiff intoned. We stood. My knees didn't shake. 14 years of standing at attention had burned the tremor out of me. Be seated, Judge Hanover said. Wood scraped as everyone sat. The sound echoed. He shuffled papers, picked up the petition, glanced at the names. Petitioners are alleging undue influence and diminished capacity in regard to the will of the late Margaret Lawson, he said. Respondent is the sole heir under said will. Everyone present? Gable stood smoothly. Richard Gable for the petitioners, Your Honor, he said. Daniel and Linda Lawson, the natural heirs. The words slid off his tongue like oil. Evelyn rose, calm. Evelyn Howe for the respondent, Your Honor, she said. Lieutenant Commander Elise Monroe. She didn't add the rest. I'd asked her not to. Judge Hanover's gaze moved to our table. For a moment, his eyes went past mine, then flicked back, sharpened. It was a small thing, the way his brows drew together, the way his gaze dropped from my face to the left side of my chest. I felt the heat of it on the small gold insignia pinned to my dark coat. Scales, quill, sword, JAG. Ms. Monroe, he said slowly, would you please stand for a moment? Evelyn gave me the slightest nod. I rose, smoothing my skirt with fingertips that were steadier than I felt. Yes, Your Honor, I said. He leaned forward, squinting. Counsel, did you say Lieutenant Commander? He asked. Yes, Your Honor, Evelyn replied. My client is an officer in the United States Navy Judge Advocate General's Corps. She's on temporary administrative leave pending the outcome of these proceedings. A ripple went through the benches behind us. Gable's smile faltered. My mother's eyes narrowed into tiny slits. My father's jaw dropped just enough to show surprise before he shut it again. Judge Hanover cleared his throat. Let me be clear, he said. You are JAG, ma'am? The word ma'am landed differently coming from a judge. My training snapped into place like a salute. Yes, Your Honor, I said. Lieutenant Commander Elise Monroe, United States Navy Judge, Advocate General's Corps. The courtroom felt smaller for a heartbeat. Gable shifted, papers whispering under his hands. My parents stared at me like I'd just started speaking a language they didn't know. Judge Hanover nodded slowly. Very well, he said. You may be seated, Lieutenant Commander. I sat. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, competing with the hum of the ancient ventilation system. Evelyn didn't look at me, but I saw the corner of her mouth tilt up a fraction. Mr. Gable, the judge said, turning back to the petition, you may proceed, but be advised. Allegations of manipulation and fraud are serious under any circumstances. When they concern a serving officer of the JAG Corps, this court is going to expect your evidence to be more than innuendo. Yes, Your Honor, Gable said, smile a little tighter. He turned to the room, playing to the benches. Your Honor, my clients are simple people, he began, voice dripping with practiced sincerity. They trusted Margaret Lawson. They loved her. They expected, reasonably, that when she passed, her estate would be handled fairly with consideration for her children. He let the word hang in the air, heavy and suggestive. Behind him, my mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue she didn't need. My father nodded solemnly as if he hadn't dropped me on that same woman's doorstep 3 decades ago and never really come back. But, Gable went on, pacing slowly. In the final year of her life, Margaret's behavior changed. Hospital records show confusion. Neighbors report unusual decisions. And then, shockingly, her will is revised to leave $4.7 million to a granddaughter who happened to be a lawyer. He glanced at me, letting the implication drip. Leaving her own son and daughter-in-law with nothing but a note and some moralizing. A murmur ran through the benches. He smiled like he'd hit his mark. So the question before this court, he said, turning back to the judge, is whether this so-called will reflects the true intentions of a confused, manipulated old woman, or the careful engineering of someone trained to twist documents to her advantage. I felt my jaw tighten. Careful engineering. He said it like I'd set a roadside bomb instead of honored the one person who'd ever really stayed. Judge Hanover's gaze slid to me again. Not accusing, measuring. Beside my hand, the blue-tabbed folder sat cool and solid, its edge pressing into my skin. I could almost feel my grandmother's fingers on it again, the way she'd pushed it across her kitchen table the last time I saw her. This is my voice if I can't speak, she'd said. You know the law, but more importantly, you know me. Don't let anyone tell you I was confused about that. In front of me now, on a bench near the aisle, I caught sight of Mrs. Collins from the bakery, hands folded around her purse. Behind her, Mr. Halverson from the hardware store. A couple of neighbors, people who'd known Margaret as more than a number on a sheet. They watched me, not with suspicion, but with something quieter. Expectation. Responsibility. The judge tapped his pen once sharply against the desk. Thank you, Mr. Gable, he said. We'll hear from Ms. Howe in due course. He paused. Let me also say this, he added, eyes sweeping the room. This court doesn't decide cases on theatrics. We decide them on law and evidence. Whether someone wears a uniform or not does not automatically make them a saint or a villain. But it does tell me something about their training and understanding of duty. That will factor into how I weigh credibility. He turned to Evelyn. Ms. Howe, he said, when we reconvene after a short recess, I'd like you to walk me through the will, the medical records, and any contemporaneous writings of the decedent. Yes, Your Honor, she said. He banged the gavel lightly. 10-minute recess, the bailiff called. Benches groaned as people stood, coats rustling like leaves. I stayed seated for a beat, staring at the grain of the table, tracing the patterns in the wood the way I'd once traced the lines on my grandmother's hand as a kid. Beside me, Evelyn gathered a few papers, then leaned just close enough for me to hear. That flew out of his hand faster than I expected, she murmured, nodding slightly toward Gable, who was now gesturing angrily at my parents near the back of the room. What did? I asked. His confidence, she said. They thought you were still the kid nobody listened to at their dinner table. Now the judge knows you're JAG. He knows you've swum in deeper legal water than this. They've just realized they picked a fight with someone who reads statutes for breakfast. I exhaled slowly. It's not about rank, I said. No, she agreed. It's about truth. Rank just told the room you know how to carry it. Across the aisle, my mother caught my eye. For the first time since the will reading, I saw something in her face besides irritation and entitlement. Fear. Not of me. Of what it meant that the judge no longer saw me as the pliable, abandoned kid they'd painted, but as an officer whose entire career depended on knowing the difference between right and wrong and defending it in rooms like this. The same rooms my grandmother had told stories about over cups of tea. Her voice low, her eyes steady, teaching me that wills were less about money and more about who people really were when everything else fell away. The bailiff called us back to order. I straightened in my chair, feeling the cool weight of the insignia against my lapel. This wasn't just my inheritance on the line. It was Margaret's voice. It was every midnight story she'd told me about greedy cousins and quiet clerks and judges who did the right thing when nobody was looking. It was every time my parents had walked away and she hadn't. I flexed my fingers once, let the tension settle into something solid. When the judge looked up again, his gaze went, instinctively now, to the JAG pin on my coat. They'd tried to drag the nobody daughter into court. What they'd actually done was drag a Navy lawyer, trained to defend the truth, into the one room in town where the truth still had teeth. The last time my parents dropped me off for a little while, I was 2.5. I don't remember the car door closing, or my mother's perfume, or my father's hand on the gear shift. I remember the smell of Margaret's house, coffee, lemon polish, and something warm in the oven, and the way the old porch boards creaked when she scooped me up like I'd been hers all along. Just for a few weeks, my mother had said, lipstick perfect, hair sprayed into a helmet. We're, sorting things out. Margaret had looked from her son to his wife, then down at me, clutching a stuffed rabbit by one ear. Take the time you need, she'd replied. I'll take the child. Weeks turned into months. Months into years. They sent postcards at first, then calls, then requests. Can you help with rent this month, Mom? The business is slow. We're thinking of investing in a new opportunity. Could you front us some capital? They came by for holidays sometimes, sweeping in with big gestures and bigger stories, staying long enough to take photos and leftovers. The rest of the time, it was just me and Margaret. She ran 3 hardware stores around Maple Falls, knew every contractor and farmer within 50 miles, and could eyeball a bolt and tell you its size without reaching for a tape measure. By 12, I was behind the counter after school, ringing up nails and paint and listening to her talk to customers about supply chains and property taxes like they were just another recipe. Money shows you who people are long before they know it themselves, she liked to say, sliding cash into the drawer. Watch where it goes when they're scared. Watch who they call when they want more. She kept a worn leather diary on the kitchen shelf next to the salt. Sometimes I'd wake up to find her at the table in her robe, the house still dark, writing in it with a cheap ballpoint pen, mug of black coffee steaming by her elbow. What do you write? I'd asked once, 11 and curious. Receipts, she'd said, eyes crinkling. Not the cash kind. The kind that remind you who did what, when, and why. Memory gets fuzzy. Ink doesn't. When I was 15, she took me to the courthouse for the first time. A cousin was fighting over land he'd never set foot on. We sat on the hard benches, listening to lawyers twist facts like balloon animals. Margaret's jaw stayed tight the whole time. On the ride home, she said, if you ever want to see what people really value, go sit in a probate hearing. All the masks fall off faster there than at a funeral. I laughed then. Years later, in a uniform I hadn't yet imagined, I'd think about that. She was the first one who told me I'd make a good lawyer. Not because I liked arguing, though she said I'd inherited that from her, but because I was the kid who always asked why the rules were what they were and what happened when someone broke them. When I told her I wanted to go Navy JAG, she'd looked at the brochure, at the list of billets and training, then at me. So you'll be in rooms full of men in uniforms and women in power suits, she'd said slowly. And your job will be to say, this is right, this is wrong, and here's the statute to back it up? Basically, I'd replied. She'd nodded, satisfied. Good, she'd said. Somebody's got to. The Navy became my other home. Norfolk, San Diego, overseas, staff billets, courtrooms on ships, in bases, in windowless buildings that smelled like recycled air and burnt coffee. I wore the scales and sword on my chest and learned how to build cases and dismantle them. Whenever I rotated stateside, I drove to Maple Falls. Margaret would be waiting on the porch, cardigan against the chill blue-tabbed folder on the table inside like a quiet guest. We're not going to talk about this today, she'd say, resting a hand on it. Just know where it is. If I'm ever not here to wave at you from the driveway, this is me waving from the page. I always touched it with 2 fingers on my way past, the way some people touch holy water. Then we'd talk about everything else, her tenants, her latest argument with a supplier, the young clerk she was mentoring at the main hardware store. My parents, when they appeared at all, were text messages and occasional drop-ins. You look thin, my mother would say, hand brushing my sleeve as if catching dust. Is the Navy feeding you? Got any advice about tax shelters? My father would add, lowering his voice like we were co-conspirators. Margaret would watch them with the same expression she used for inventory reports that didn't add up. One evening, 2 years before she died, she pulled the blue folder closer, thumb tapping the tab. "I added a sentence today," she said, "about Daniel and Linda." "Is that wise?" I asked. She smiled without humor. "Truth is always wise," she said, "even when it's messy." The call came on a Tuesday. I was in my Norfolk office, surrounded by case files, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number from Maple Falls. "Lieutenant Commander Monroe," I answered. "Is this Elise?" A soft voice, older. "This is Nurse Paula from Maple Ridge Care. I'm with Margaret." My heart dropped into my stomach. "She passed about an hour ago," Paula said gently, peacefully. "She was holding that blue folder she always talked about. I thought you'd want to know." For a second, the world narrowed to the hum of the fluorescent light above my desk and the faint whir of the HVAC. "Thank you," I managed. "She made me promise to tell you there's a letter in there," Paula added. "She said you'd know what to do with it." I was on a plane that night. The house felt wrong without her in it. Same coffee smell, same wind chimes on the porch, same diary on the kitchen shelf. Just silence where there should have been her humming under her breath while she made tea. The blue-tabbed folder sat in the center of the dining table. I didn't open it. Not yet. The will reading came 2 days later, in the office of Margaret's longtime attorney, Mr. Phillips, thin, glasses sliding down his nose, hands that shook only when he wasn't holding a pen. My parents swept in like they were arriving at a gala, not a legal appointment. My mother in heels too high for the ice outside. My father in a suit that still bore the faint sheen of someone else's money. They air-kissed my cheeks, smelled faintly of expensive perfume and cold. "Elise," my mother said, "you look tired." "Travel," I said. Mr. Phillips cleared his throat, gestured for us to sit. "Margaret was very clear about her wishes," he began. "She updated this will 18 months ago with full capacity. We'll go through it line by line." He started with small bequests, rings to cousins, donated funds to the church, a scholarship for the vocational school. My mother shifted impatiently. "Let's get to the big stuff," my father muttered. Phillips adjusted his glasses. "As for the residue of the estate," he read, "including the primary residence, the 3 hardware stores, and all accounts, investments, and properties held in my name." He paused. My parents leaned forward. "I leave these to my granddaughter, Elise Monroe," he continued, "in recognition not only of her service to her country, but of the countless rides, meals, repairs, and nights she spent at my table when others did not." Silence punched the air out of the room. My mother's mouth fell open. My father's face went from flushed to white in 3 seconds flat. "To my son, Daniel, and his wife, Linda," Phillips read on, "I leave my love and the following words. Legacy is not measured by what you are handed, but by what you do when you could have showed up and didn't." My father shot to his feet. "This is a joke," he said. "You expect me to believe my own mother cut me out? That she left everything to the kid she raised because we gave her a chance to help?" Phillips looked pained. "She left everything to the child who stayed," he corrected softly, "and who, according to her notes, handled every errand, every appointment, and every major decision with her for the last 15 years. My mother slammed her palm on the table. "She was confused," she said. "You all know that," she repeated herself. She forgot words. Elise has been a lawyer for 10 minutes? She probably pressured her, slipped something in front of her when she was tired. My jaw clenched. "Grandma passed her last cognitive eval 6 months ago," I said. "She could still beat me at Scrabble." My father glared at me. "You stand there in that uniform and act like you're better than us?" he snapped. "You think that pin on your chest gives you the right to steal what should have been mine?" "Daniel," Phillips warned. My father jabbed a finger at me. "You're not taking a cent," he said. "We'll challenge this. We'll have it thrown out. See how your precious Navy likes having a thief in their legal corps." My mother grabbed her purse, chair scraping back. "This isn't over," she hissed. They stormed out. The door shook in their wake. I stood there, hand resting on the blue folder. Phillips had slid my way, ears ringing. Later, at the graveside, the wind cut through my coat like knives. Snowflakes fell on the polished stone, melting the second they landed. I stayed after everyone left, fingers tracing Margaret's name. Someone cleared their throat behind me. I turned. It wasn't a mourner. It was a man in a cheap coat, breath puffing in white clouds. He held a thick envelope. "Elise Monroe?" he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. He handed me the envelope. "You've been served," he said. "Petition to invalidate the will of Margaret Lawson on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity." He hesitated, eyes softening. "Sorry," he added. "I don't get to pick where they tell me to deliver these." I nodded, fingers numb around the paper. Behind him, at the edge of the cemetery, my parents watched from their car, engine idling, exhaust curling into the gray sky. My mother's face was turned away. My father met my eyes, held them, then put the car in gear and pulled away. I stood between the stone with Margaret's name and the fresh pain of the envelope in my hand, snow settling on both. The wind rattled the old church bells somewhere in the distance. My grandmother had once told me justice was just truth given teeth. They'd chosen to put their claims in ink. They'd chosen a battlefield they thought they knew. They'd forgotten she'd raised me on courthouse stories and ethics and the quiet power of a well-kept diary. They'd forgotten I wore a uniform that required me to defend the law even when it cut close to bone. As I slid my gloved thumb under the flap and opened the envelope, one thought settled clear and cold in my chest. They hadn't just picked a fight over $4.7 million. They'd picked a fight with everything Margaret had trained me to be. I read the complaint at Margaret's dining table, the same table where I'd done algebra homework and sorted receipts and listened to stories about long-ago judges and longer-ago betrayals. The house was too quiet. No radio murmuring in the kitchen. No clatter of her favorite blue mug on the counter. Just the thin scratch of paper as I flipped pages. Petitioners allege that respondent, being a licensed attorney and granddaughter of the decedent, exerted undue influence over Margaret Lawson during a period of diminished mental capacity. I snorted. Margaret had been sharper at 78 than half the junior officers I worked with on base, including, but not limited to, isolating decedent from her natural heirs, controlling access to medications, and unreasonably inserting herself into financial decisions for personal gain. My jaw clenched. "Unreasonably inserting herself," I muttered. "Yeah, that's what they call driving her to every doctor's appointment when you never showed up." The words blurred for a second. I set the papers down, pressed my thumb and forefinger into my eyes until the sting receded. On the sideboard, Margaret's diary sat where she'd left it. Worn leather, elastic band frayed from years of stretching. I reached for it like a lifeline. Inside, her handwriting looped and dipped across the pages. Some entries were mundane, weather notes, grocery lists, who'd stopped by the store. Others cut sharper. June 12th, Daniel called, wants advice about refinancing again. Told him no. He didn't ask how my knee is. Elise called from Norfolk just to ask how the tomatoes are doing. Funny what people remember to care about. September 3rd, Linda came by, asked what I plan to do with everything when I'm gone. As if I am a piece of furniture to be moved and not a person. She says Elise doesn't need it because she has the Navy. I told her need isn't the metric I'm using. January 21st, cognitive screening today. Passed. Doctor laughed when I recited all 3 addresses from memory. I am not confused. I am tired of being treated as if I can't see what my own son is doing. There were older entries, too. April 5th, 1998. They dropped Elise off again for a few weeks. Brought no clothes this time. I think they've decided this is permanent without saying it. She asked me yesterday if I am mom now. I told her I am Margaret. Her mother is Linda. But I will be the one who stays, and staying is what makes a mother. I closed the diary, fingers trembling. The complaint on the table painted me as a manipulator who'd swooped in at the end to snatch money from a confused old woman. The diary painted 2 very different truths, that Margaret had been clear-eyed and that my parents had been absent, except when their names and bills needed someone else's ink. My phone buzzed. "Monroe," I answered automatically. "Elise, it's Captain Flanders," my commanding officer said. First off, I'm sorry about your grandmother. She sounded like one hell of a woman. She was, sir, I said, throat tight. He hesitated. I've received notice of a civil suit involving you and allegations of undue influence, he went on. You know the drill. While this is pending, we're putting you on temporary administrative leave. It's not punitive, it's protective. For you and for the command. I stared at the blue folder, at the diary, at the envelope with my parents' accusations. I understand, sir, I said. I'll keep you updated. You do that, he said. And Elise, don't try to handle this alone. Even JAG needs counsel sometimes. After we hung up, the house felt heavier. My career wasn't in jeopardy yet, but the shadow was there. The local paper, hungry in a way small-town papers always were, had already run a headline. Navy lawyer named in a state dispute. Family alleges manipulation. They'd called me for comment. I hadn't answered. I wasn't going to argue my case in newsprint. I needed someone who understood this terrain better than I did. So I called Evelyn Howe. We'd met once, briefly, at a state bar event. She'd given a talk on contested wills and the emotional landmines hidden in legal language. She answered on the second ring. Evelyn Howe, she said. Ms. Howe, this is Lieutenant Commander Elise Monroe, I replied. I was at your seminar on undue influence last year. Ah, she said. The Navy JAG in the back row making insightful faces. What can I do for you, Commander? My grandmother died, I said. She left me her estate. My parents are suing to overturn the will. They've already painted me as the villain in town and in the complaint. I could represent myself, technically, but I can't be objective. And my CO just put me on administrative leave until this is resolved. She was quiet for a beat. Where are you now? She asked. At her house, I said. In Maple Falls, I have the will. Her diary, the complaint. Is the will properly executed? She asked. Witnesses, notarized, dated? Yes, I said. She updated it 18 months ago. Her lawyer's meticulous. Medical evaluations? She pressed. She had cognitive screenings, I said. All normal. I have the reports. She exhaled. Then what your parents are after is not justice, she said. It's access. They see $4.7 million and assume it's theirs by birthright. They're hoping the suggestion of impropriety will scare you into a settlement. It won't, I said. I know, she replied. That's why I'm taking your case. She didn't say if. We'll need to file a response, she went on. We'll attach the medical records, emphasize your grandmother's capacity, and subtly highlight your role as caretaker, not puppeteer. Do we mention JAG? I asked. She paused. Not in the paperwork, she said. Judges don't like feeling played. But in person, wear your insignia. Let your presence tell the story. You don't need to wave your rank around. Just be who you are. The court will notice. I thought of the article, of Gable's smirk at the will reading, of my parents practicing their lines in some kitchen somewhere, painting themselves as loving, concerned, natural heirs, and me as the cold, calculating lawyer who'd swooped in. They're going to twist everything I say, I said. Yes, she agreed. That's their strategy. Gable will try to rattle you in deposition, make you look evasive or arrogant. You've done cross-examinations. You know that playbook. Feels different when it's me in the witness chair, I said. Of course it does, she replied. But the law doesn't change because it's personal. Facts don't change. Your grandmother's handwriting doesn't change. I looked at the diary again. I have her words, I said. That's your anchor, she said. We'll file the response, schedule depositions, and prepare for hearing. Between now and then, you do two things. Gather every document that shows her mental clarity and independence, and stay off social media. No comments on articles, no subtweeting relatives, no venting where a screenshot can live forever. I wasn't planning to, I said dryly. Good, she said. Let your parents perform for the court of public opinion. We'll focus on the actual court. The deposition was 6 hours of slow-motion hostility. We sat in a conference room at Gable's firm. Too much dark wood, not enough warmth. A court reporter tapped away in the corner, fingers flying. Evelyn sat beside me, legal pad in front of her. expression calm, every muscle coiled. Gable prowled. Lieutenant Commander Monroe, he said, emphasizing the title like it was an accusation. How often did you visit your grandmother in the last year of her life? Every leave, I said. Phone calls twice a week. Video calls when we could. And how often did my clients, Daniel and Linda Lawson, visit? He asked. You'll have to ask them, I said. He smirked. We will, he said. For the record, though, would you say you spent more time with Margaret than they did? Yes, I replied simply. He pounced. So you had more access, he said. More opportunity to suggest changes to her will. Objection to characterization, Evelyn said smoothly. Counsel is testifying. Sustained for the record, she added, for the reporter's benefit. Gable leaned on the back of his chair. Did you ever discuss her will with her? He asked. Yes, I said. She brought it up. She wanted to be sure I knew where it was, and that her wishes would be followed. Did you ever advise her on how to structure it? He pressed. No, I said. I told her to talk to her lawyer. I'm not licensed in this state. It would have been inappropriate for me to give her legal advice on estate planning. He arched a brow. Yet you're willing to benefit from those plans, he said. I didn't choose who she left her estate to, I replied. She did. He flipped through his notes. Isn't it true, he said, that you once told your grandmother your parents couldn't be trusted with money? I thought back. A night at the kitchen table, a stack of past due notices with my father's name on them, Margaret's tight mouth. I told her, I said carefully, that based on their history, I wouldn't lend them money I couldn't afford to lose. That's different from telling her what to do with hers. He gave a tight, satisfied smile. So you admit you had a negative perception of my clients, he said. Objection, Evelyn said, asked and answered. My client is allowed to have opinions about her parents' fiscal responsibility. That doesn't equate to undue influence. He tried to rattle me with rapid-fire questions about my salary, my deployments, my debts. Are you in need of money, Lieutenant Commander? He asked at one point, voice dripping with insinuation. No more than anyone with student loans and a mortgage, I said, but my Navy pay covers my needs. He leaned in. So $4.7 million would be a nice bonus, he said. $4.7 million is my grandmother's life's work, I replied. It's not a bonus, it's a responsibility. Evelyn tapped her pen once, lightly against her pad, a subtle signal. You offered mediation, I said suddenly before he could shift gears. Why? If you're so confident the will is invalid, why not take your chances with a judge? His eyes flickered. Objection, he said automatically. I'm not here to answer questions. I smiled, thin. Neither is my character, I said. My actions speak for themselves. By the time we finished, my throat was dry and my head pounded. As we left, Gable said, loud enough for my parents to hear in the lounge, You know, Elise, this would be a lot easier if you just agree to split the estate. Save everyone the trouble. I stopped. Turned. I didn't start this, I said, voice even. They did. I suggested a family meeting. They responded with a lawsuit. I won't be bullied into rewriting a will they didn't earn just because they're louder. His smile thinned. See you in court, he said. 2 days before the hearing, my parents showed up at Margaret's house unannounced. No text, no call. Just a car crunching up the driveway and two Thegers storming up the walk in winter coats and indignation. I met them at the door, blocking the entrance with my body. You can't just... My mother started. This is my house now, I said. You can't just walk in. My father's eyes narrowed. You'd keep us out of our own mother's home, he demanded. You think signing a few papers makes you queen of the hill? It makes me the executor, I said, and the owner, according to the will you're trying to burn. My mother jabbed a finger at me. Margaret was confused, she said. She repeated herself. She forgot where she put things. You took advantage of that and twisted her into cutting us out. Cognitive evaluations say otherwise, I replied. So does her diary. I can show you the entries where she documents every time you called for money and disappeared the second she said no. They both flinched. You're turning her against us even in death, my father said. We're her children, Elise. That should mean something. It does, I said. It means she trusted me to protect her from you when you wanted what she built more than you wanted her around. My mother's eyes filled with angry tears. How dare you? She whispered. No, I said quietly. How dare you? You dropped me here when I was 2 and never came back for good. You only came when you wanted checks. She raised me. She went to parent-teacher conferences. She taught me to drive. She sat in the front row when I was commissioned. You send Christmas cards and complaints. My father's jaw worked. You're going to regret this, he said, dragging us into court, turning the town against us. The judge will see what you are. I held his gaze. I hope so, I said, because what I am is someone who stayed. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Shame, maybe, or the ghost of the boy in the faded Polaroid on the hallway wall, grinning beside Margaret and a baby me. Then he looked away. See you in court, he said, stealing Gable's line like it was a shield. They left. The porch boards creaked under their boots, then went still. I stood in the doorway, hand on the frame, the cold biting through my socks. For years, I'd swallowed the words lodged in my chest, telling myself the uniform gave me enough distance that I didn't need to say them. Now they hung in the air between us like condensation, visible, undeniable. I closed the door gently. Inside, the house hummed in its quiet way. The blue folder sat on the table. The diary waited on the shelf. The JAG insignia on my lapel winked faintly in the dim light. 2 days from now, I'd walk into the courtroom not as the abandoned toddler they'd left behind, but as the lawyer my grandmother had believed I could become, carrying her receipts in my hands, ready to give the truth teeth. The morning of the hearing broke steel gray and bitter. Frost feathered the edges of Margaret's kitchen window. The heater rattled in the corner like an old man clearing his throat. I stood in front of the hall mirror, dark coat buttoned, hair smoothed into regulation neatness, blue tabbed folder tucked under my arm like a shield. The JAG insignia lay on the dresser where I'd left it the night before. Gold. Small. Heavy in a way no metal should be. I picked it up. My thumb traced the scales, the quill, the sword. Margaret's voice echoed in my head from some long-ago conversation at this same mirror, her hand resting on my shoulder. Truth is a shield, she'd said. Never be afraid to hold it up, even if it reflects things people don't want to see. I pinned the insignia to my lapel. It clicked into place with a tiny, decisive sound. All right, I told my reflection. Let's go find out who they are when the talking stops. You already know what happened when the judge saw the pin. The question, are you JAG, ma'am? The shift in the room, the smirks sliding off my parents' faces like condensation. That was the first crack. The real break came later. Ms. Howe, Judge Hanover said after the recess, walk me through the evidence. Evelyn rose. She moved like she had all the time in the world and every fact on her side. Your Honor, she began, this case rests on 3 pillars: the decedent's capacity, her clearly expressed intent, and the petitioner's conduct. I'll start with capacity. She handed up a thick packet. Exhibit A, cognitive assessments from Dr. Singh, conducted at 6-month intervals over the last 3 years of Margaret Lawson's life, she said. Each concludes she was fully oriented, able to understand complex financial decisions, and capable of executing legal documents. The judge flipped through. I saw his eyes pause on words I knew by heart. No evidence of dementia, no impairment observed. Mr. Gable's petition paints a picture of confusion and decline, Evelyn continued. The medical record paints the opposite. Gable shifted in his chair. Those assessments don't capture day-to-day behavior, he said. Family observed. We'll get to family, Evelyn said smoothly. For now, the only professional qualified to evaluate cognitive capacity found none of the deficits alleged. She lifted another folder. Exhibit B, the will, she went on, prepared by attorney Harold Phillips, witnessed, notarized, executed 18 months before Ms. Lawson's death. No changes after, no midnight amendments, no last-minute scribbles, just a clear allocation of assets consistent with her long-standing concerns. Concerns? The judge asked. Which brings me to intent, she said, and my stomach tightened around the word. She held up something I recognized instantly, Margaret's diary. Exhibit C, Evelyn said, is the decedent's personal journal kept for decades. We don't offer it for gossip, but for contemporaneous documentation of her relationship with her son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter, as well as her reasoning for her estate planning choices. Gable shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor," he said. "Hearsay, prejudicial, and a gross invasion of privacy." Judge Hanover eyed the worn leather. "The decedent is not here to testify," he said quietly. "But if she left a record that speaks to her state of mind and intent when making the very will at issue." He looked to Evelyn. "Ms. Howe." "We're not offering every page," she said. "Only specific entries tied to dates of legal decisions. They corroborate the medical record and the will's language. They also directly contradict the petitioner's claim that she was confused and unaware of what she was signing." He thought a moment. "Objection overruled," he said. "I'll admit the selected entries for the limited purpose of understanding the decedent's capacity and intent." Gable sat down hard. Evelyn stepped closer to the bench, opened the diary to a page marked with a sticky note. "Entry dated January 21st, 18 months ago," she read. "The same day the will was executed." Her voice shifted, softer, as she slipped into Margaret's words. "Cognitive screening today, passed with flying colors. Doctor laughed when I recited all 3 store addresses and bank account numbers from memory. I am not confused. I am tired of being treated as if I can't see what my own son is doing with money I give him." A whisper rippled through the benches. My father's face flushed red. Evelyn turned a few pages. "Entry dated 2 days before the new will," she read. "Daniel called again. Wants me to reconsider giving Elise so much responsibility at the stores. Says she has the Navy and doesn't need my assets. I love my son, but I do not trust him with what I built. Elise has earned it not by blood, but by the way she has lived. I will put that in writing so no one can pretend otherwise when I'm gone." For a heartbeat, all I could hear was the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights. I knew those words. I'd read them at the table. Hearing them aloud in this room was like having Margaret stand up from the front bench and say them herself. Evelyn closed the diary gently. "At no point," she said, "does Ms. Lawson express confusion about her choices. She expresses sadness, yes. Frustration. But clarity? In abundance, bustas." She straightened. "Finally, Exhibit D," she said. "Bank statements and phone records showing a consistent pattern, petitioners appearing when checks were needed, disappearing when caretaking was required. Respondent, meanwhile, is documented as the one arranging medical appointments, paying in-store bills when cash flow was tight, and being physically present." She handed up another packet. Judge Hanover flipped pages. Deposits, withdrawals, check memos, help with rent, loan for business, credit card payment, all with my parents' names attached. He sighed through his nose. "Mr. Gable," he said, "your petition describes your clients as devoted children, deeply involved in their mother's daily life. These records suggest a more transactional relationship." Gable recovered quickly. "Financial help is hardly a crime, Your Honor," he said. "Families support each other. My client simply expected the natural order of things, that a parent would divide assets among children, not funnel them all to one grandchild with professional advantages." He let his gaze flick to me on that last phrase. Judge Hanover's eyebrows twitched. "You'll have a chance to call your clients," he said. "Let's move to cross-examination." They called my father first. He walked to the witness stand with the stiff gait of a man whose carefully rehearsed lines had just been overshadowed by receipts. The bailiff swore him in. "Mr. Lawson," Gable said, shifting to a gentler tone. "Did you love your mother?" My father's voice caught perfectly. "Yes," he said, "of course, I'm her son." "Did you intend to abandon her, as the diary suggests?" Gable asked. "Never," my father said, shaking his head. "We had lives, jobs. Elise lived closer. My mother insisted she was fine. She didn't want to be a burden." "Did you notice any changes in her behavior in the last year?" Gable prompted. "She repeated herself sometimes," my father said. "She'd misplace things. She talked a lot about wills and teaching lessons. It seemed off." Gable turned, spreading his hands. "Your Honor, you see the picture, a confused elderly woman, A granddaughter with legal training and a motive. Cross-examination, Evelyn cut in. She walked to the lectern, no theatrics, just a slim folder in hand. Mr. Lawson, she said, voice neutral. How often did you visit your mother in the last year of her life? He hesitated. Whenever we could, he said. Things were busy. A number, please, she said. Ballpark is fine. He shifted. 5, 6 times, he said. She consulted the phone logs. Phone records show 3 visits, she said. 2 on holidays, 1 when you needed help with a loan application. Does that sound accurate? He flushed. Maybe, he muttered. How many birthdays did you spend with her in the last 5 years? She asked. He opened his mouth, closed it. I don't know, he said. Ms. Monroe, she asked, turning to me. How many of your grandmother's birthdays did you attend in the last 5 years? All of them, I said. I requested leave when I could. When I couldn't, we did a video call while she blew out candles. Gable muttered an objection. Just context, Evelyn said mildly. She turned back to my father. You testified that your mother was confused, she said. Did you ever accompany her to a cognitive assessment? No, he said. Did you ever raise your concerns about her mental state with her doctor? She pressed. No, he repeated, quicker. So your opinion that she was confused is not supported by any professional evaluation, she said. But you did ask her more than once to change her will to give you control, correct? I was trying to simplify things, he snapped. Keep it in the family. And when she refused, you respected that? Evelyn asked. Yes, he said. She lifted a letter. Letter dated March 9th, she read. From you to Ms. Lawson. Mom, you're being unreasonable. Elise doesn't need all that. I'm your son. You owe me a chance to manage what you built. She raised an eyebrow. Is that respect, Mr. Lawson? She asked. My father's shoulders slumped. I was frustrated, he said. I didn't mean, but you did write it, she said. And she responded in her diary and in her will that she saw that as greed, not need. Gable objected again, but the words were already in the air. Linda took the stand next. Her performance was thinner, more brittle. She talked about image, about plans, about how unfair it was that Elise would get everything. Under cross, Evelyn walked her gently but relentlessly through every time she'd referred to me as Margaret's charity case in texts Margaret had saved. In the back rows, I heard a few soft gasps. By the time it was my turn, the story Gable had tried to sell, a confused, manipulated old woman and a scheming granddaughter, was already showing cracks. Sitting in the witness chair, the Bible cool under my palm, I felt like I'd stepped fully into both my roles at once. The abandoned kid on Margaret's porch and the JAG officer sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but. Lieutenant Commander Monroe, Gable began, stress on the title again. You've heard your parents' testimony. Do you dispute that you had more access to your grandmother than they did? No, I said. I agree, I had more access to her. Because I showed up. A faint chuckle escaped someone on the benches before the bailiff shot them a look. You're a trained lawyer, he said. You know how wills work. You understand the power of language. Isn't it possible that you influenced her choices? Of course I influenced her, I said. He pounced. There we have it, he said, turning to the judge. She admits, by existing, I added calmly. By being the person who drove her to appointments, fixed her leaking roof, brought her dinner when she was tired. She saw the difference between what people said and what they did. She wrote it down, then she made a choice. Did you ever tell her your parents couldn't be trusted with money? He asked. I told her, I said, that based on 30 years of history, bailing them out had never taught them to be responsible. That's a fact, not a manipulation. He bristled. Did you want the inheritance, Papats? He demanded. I thought of the long nights on deployment when I'd pictured Margaret's kitchen, not her bank accounts. I wanted my grandmother to be at peace, I said. If that meant splitting everything 3 ways, I would have accepted that. The fact that she chose otherwise is painful for them, for me. But my job now is to honor what she wrote, not rewrite it to avoid hard feelings. He snorted. Convenient, he said. Evelyn stood. Your Honor, she said, may I read one more diary entry? Judge Hanover gestured for her to proceed. Entry dated 6 months ago, she read, voice steady. Elise worries I am starting a war by leaving everything to her. I told her wars start when people feel entitled to what they didn't earn. I am not punishing Daniel. I am acknowledging reality. He had 30 years to show me he could be trusted with what I built. He chose not to. Elise never asked for a cent, and somehow she is the one they will paint as greedy. Funny how that works. The room went very still. Gable's jaw worked. No further questions, he muttered. I stepped down from the stand, the insignia catching the light for a second, as I passed under a high window. Judge Hanover shuffled papers. The court will take a brief recess, he said. Then I'll issue my ruling. When he came back, his robe looked heavier somehow. He sat, glanced at the file, then at us. This is not an easy case, he said. Not legally, the law is clear enough, but emotionally. We have a deceased mother and grandmother, a substantial estate, and a family fractured long before any of these documents were signed. My parents sat rigid, hands clenched. I folded mine in my lap, blue folder under my fingertips. The petitioners claim their mother was confused and manipulated, he went on. The evidence says otherwise. Medical records show full cognitive capacity. The will is properly executed. The diary entries we've heard today show a woman painfully aware of her children's flaws and her granddaughter's constancy. He looked at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Lawson, he said gently, the record reflects that you appeared for your mother when money was involved, and less so when time and care were needed. That is not a crime, but it is a pattern. He turned to me. Ms. Monroe, he said, the record reflects that you were present. You shouldered responsibilities that were not yours by law, but were yours by love. He exhaled. Legally, he said, voice firm. There is no evidence of undue influence, no evidence of diminished capacity at the time of execution. There is clear, consistent evidence of intent. Therefore, this court upholds the will of Margaret Lawson in full. My lungs let out air I didn't realize I'd been holding. All assets listed in that will remain with the respondent, Elise Monroe, he continued. The petition to invalidate the will is denied. Costs are assessed to the petitioners. My mother made a strangled sound. My father stared straight ahead, eyes glassy. Judge Hanover wasn't done. Let me add this, he said quietly. Justice, in my experience, does not always follow bloodlines. It follows conduct. It follows character. In this case, the law and Ms. Lawson's values align. She chose deliberately to leave her estate to the one who stayed. This court will not rewrite that choice because others now regret their absence. He banged the gavel once. A court is adjourned, he said. Chairs scraped. People murmured. Gable started talking fast in my parents' ears, voice urgent. I sat for a moment, fingertips pressed to the blue tab of the folder, the JAG pin warm against my lapel. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like someone had finally said out loud what the diary had been whispering all along. As I stood and turned toward the aisle, Judge Hanover caught my eye. Lieutenant Commander, he said, voice lower now. A word in chambers? It won't take long. My heart tripped. Evelyn gave me a reassuring look. In the hallway, as my parents staggered past, hollow and brittle, I watched the judge's door open and knew that whatever he was about to say, it would be the first time anyone in authority had told me who they thought I was, not who my parents had always insisted I should be. His chambers were smaller than I expected. Bookshelves lined 2 walls full of thick volumes and thin paperbacks. A framed photo of a much younger Judge Hanover in a cheap suit stood on the credenza, a tired woman and 2 kids flanking him. A plant leaned toward the single window, leaves pale in winter light. He gestured to a worn leather chair. Sit, Lieutenant Commander, he said, shrugging off his robe and hanging it on a hook. I sat, blue folder balanced on my knees. Up close, he looked older than from the bench. Lines around his eyes deeper, hair thinner, but his gaze was sharp. I'll keep this brief, he said, settling behind his desk. I don't often ask parties back here. I prefer to let my rulings speak for themselves. My spine straightened instinctively. Yes, Your Honor, I said. He glanced at the JAG pin. I recognized that insignia before Ms. Howe said a word, he said. My nephew's JAG. He never stops talking about ethics briefs and the standard. A corner of my mouth twitched. It's a thing, I said. He smiled faintly. Margaret Lawson once kept my lights on for 3 months, he said abruptly. That jolted me. I didn't know, I said. He nodded toward the photo on the credenza. Back before this robe, I was a young public defender, he said. New baby, old car, no money. The furnace blew in January. I went into Lawson Hardware to buy a part I couldn't afford. She looked at my hands, my suit, the circles under my eyes, and told me to take what I needed. Said I could pay her back when I could breathe again. He leaned back, eyes distant. 3 months later, I came in with an envelope of cash. He continued. She pushed it back at me and said, give me 25%. The rest you'll need. Just don't forget what it felt like to be scared. I swallowed. That sounds like her, I said. She never let me pay her back in full, he said. But she did make me promise one thing, that if I ever saw her in my courtroom or anyone she cared about, I'd remember that people are more than their worst choices and that sometimes the quiet ones are carrying more weight than the loud ones. He looked at me. I saw her in you today, he said simply. The words hit harder than the gavel had. My throat went tight. I stared at a scuff on the floor, willing my eyes not to burn. I was afraid my career would be collateral damage, I admitted. That even if we won, there'd still be this cloud. He nodded. Civil disputes don't automatically stain a uniform, he said. How you handle them can. You were measured, honest. You didn't take cheap shots. That matters. He folded his hands. I can't fix your family, he said. The law isn't a therapist, but I can tell you this. Your grandmother didn't just leave you assets. She left you her story. You carried it well today. She would be proud. That did it. Tears slipped free, hot and humiliating. I wiped them away with the back of my hand, half apologizing. Sorry, sir, I said, voice rough. It's been a lot. He shook his head. Never apologize to the truth for showing up, he said. That's something Margaret would have written in that diary of hers. I laughed, a short, watery sound. He stood, signaling we were done. One more thing, he said as I rose. Don't let this victory turn into another kind of prison. You're not obligated to hate your parents forever to prove you loved your grandmother. You're not obligated to forgive them quickly either. You are obligated to live in a way she'd recognize. He nodded at the blue-tabbed folder. Put that somewhere safe, he said. Then go live, Monroe. Court's finished its part. The rest is yours. Outside his chambers, the hallway felt brighter. Evelyn was waiting on a bench, coat over her arm. Well, she asked. He told me about his furnace, I said. Her mouth curved. Ah, she said. The Lawson furnace story. She told me that once. Said it was one of the best investments she ever made. We walked down the stairs together. At the bottom, my parents stood by the doors, Gable hovering like a storm cloud starting to dissipate. My mother's eyes were red, mascara smudged, composure fractured. My father looked old. Not the strutting, loud man from the will reading, just tired. He opened his mouth, closed it, said nothing. For the first time in my life, no line came. No demand, no threat. Just silence. Evelyn leaned close. You owe them nothing right now, she murmured. Not a word, not a look. You already said what mattered in there. I nodded. We walked past. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily, softening the hard edges of the courthouse steps. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs, sharp enough to feel like waking up. As we reached the bottom, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A Norfolk number. Monroe, I answered. Flanders, my CO said. Saw the news. Looks like the judge saw things clearly. Yes, sir, I said. Administrative leave is lifted, he said. Your record's unchanged. When you're ready to come back, the desk is still there. Thank you, sir, I said, breath fogging. He paused. And Elise, he added, for what it's worth, You handled this exactly the way I'd expect one of ours to. That matters more to me than the money ever will." The line clicked off. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The JAG pin felt warm against my chest, like it had absorbed some of the room's heat. For the first time since the nurse's call, the weight I'd been carrying shifted from a crushing load to something else. A mantle I'd chosen to shoulder. Not because I wanted the fight, because I refused to let Margaret face it alone, even in death. It started with a knock on the porch, a week after the ruling, while I was kneeling in Margaret's frozen garden bed, pressing bulbs into icy soil because she'd ordered them months before and I refused to let them go to waste. The sky was the color of tin. My breath puffed in little clouds as I worked, fingers numb inside my gloves. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of knuckles on the old wooden frame was unmistakable. I straightened, rubbing my hands together for warmth, and walked around to the front. Daniel Lawson stood on the porch, shoulders hunched in a coat that looked too big, hat in his hands like an apology. No lawyer, no mother, just my father. "Can we talk?" he asked. His voice had lost the boom. I leaned against the porch post, keeping wood between us. "Depends," I said. "Is this about appealing? Because Evelyn says that would be a waste of everyone's time and money." He shook his head quickly. "No," he said. "Gable's out. He got his bill. We got our answer." He glanced past me into the house. "I've been reading," he blurted. "Reading what?" I asked. He looked embarrassed. "The diary," he said. "Or the parts you let Mom see and she let me see." I had given Linda photocopies of 3 entries after the ruling. Not to twist the knife, but because it felt wrong for Margaret's words to be confined to court exhibits. It was up to them whether they read them. He swallowed. "She saw me," he said. "Not the version I practiced in my head. The one who always had a reason not to come by. The one who only called when the bills piled up. The kid who never stopped thinking he was owed something because life was hard for him." The wind chimes rattled softly, tinkling against the eaves. "She loved you," I said. "She wrote that too." He laughed, bitter. "She loved me enough not to trust me with what she built," he said. "That's a special kind of humbling." We stood in silence for a moment. Snow crunched under his boots as he shifted. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said finally, "for the lawsuit, for the things we said, for leaving you here when you were a kid and pretending that was temporary." He looked down at his hands. "I told myself you turned out fine," he went on. "Look at her. Navy officer, JAG, all that. As if your success meant my absence didn't matter. Reading those pages, I saw how wrong that was." My throat tightened. Anger and grief flared, wrestling in my chest. "You almost destroyed my career," I said. "You dragged my name through the mud in my own hometown. You accused me of manipulating the only person who ever made me feel chosen." He flinched. "I know," he said. "There's no excuse. I was afraid of being left with nothing, of being seen as the son who got written out. Instead of asking what that said about me, I asked how to fix the optics." He grimaced. "Money burned the bridge instead of fixing it," he said quietly. "You were right in the doorway. You stayed. I left. That's on me." A wind bit at my cheeks. Some part of me wanted to slam the door, to tell him he'd made his choices, to guard the peace I'd finally found like the trust documents in the safe. Another part heard Margaret's voice again. "Don't let anger turn you into them. Give them enough not to starve, but not enough to hurt people." I crossed my arms, not in defense, but to keep from reaching for something I wasn't ready to hold. "What do you want?" I asked. He looked genuinely confused for a moment, like he'd expected yelling and found questions instead. "Not money," he said quickly. "I know better than to ask you for that now. I just want a chance to try again. Different this time. Without pretending." He gestured vaguely toward town. "I can't fix 30 years in one porch conversation," he said. "I won't ask you to pretend everything's fine. I just Don't want the last thing you remember about me to be a lawsuit and a slammed door. A crow cawed somewhere across the street. I thought of the little girl I'd once been, watching taillights disappear down this road, clutching a stuffed rabbit, and wondering when a few weeks would be over. She deserved more rage than I could muster in that moment. But the woman on the porch, with frozen dirt under her nails and a uniform hanging pressed in the hall, deserved more than living forever in reaction to someone else's failures. I don't know what try again looks like, I said. He nodded. Me neither, he said. Maybe coffee sometime. In daylight. No lawyers, no paperwork, just awkward conversation until it's less awkward. A humorless laugh escaped me. That's a low bar, I said. The only one I have a shot at clearing, he replied. We stood there, winter breathing between us. I'm still angry, I said, and hurt, and tired. You have every right to be, he said. I'm not promising forgiveness, I added, or holidays, or keys. He smiled, sad. I'm not asking for any of that, he said. I'm just asking if the door is welded shut, or if you'll at least leave it on the hinges in case we both figure out how to knock like adults someday. The image made me snort. You're bad at metaphors, I said. I know, he replied. Your grandmother told me that for 40 years. Silence again. Then, slowly, I nodded. The door's on hinges, I said. That's the best I can do right now. His shoulders sagged in something like relief. I'll take it, he said. And I'll try to earn more than that. He turned to go, then paused. She would have been proud of you, he said without looking back. Not because you got her money, because you didn't fold when we tried to take it. The words hit something deep and sore. Good, I said, because that's the only opinion I care about in this story. He nodded once, then walked down the steps, boots crunching on the path, figure shrinking against the gray. I watched him go. The porch rail was cold under my fingers, paint chipped where Margaret's rings had tapped against it for decades. Later, inside, I opened the diary to the last entry. August 29th. If this finds Elise after I'm gone, I hope the court chose truth. I hope Daniel finds humility before ruin, but I cannot force that. I can only choose where my work goes and who carries it. I choose the one who stayed. Justice is not a moment. It is a way of living. I closed the diary, slid it onto the shelf beside the blue folder. Those two things, more than any bank statement, were the real map. The rest was just numbers. In January, I flew back to Norfolk. The base smelled the same: jet fuel, salt air, and industrial cleaner. The JAG office buzzed with the usual controlled chaos, phones ringing, printers whirring, junior officers hustling from office to office with arms full of files. When I walked in, heads turned, then quickly turned back like everyone pretended they hadn't been waiting to see how I'd look. Flanders leaned in his doorway, coffee in hand. You leave my state for 5 minutes and all hell breaks loose up there, he said. Consider it a live fire exercise in probate, I replied. He grinned. Good to have you back, Commander, he said. We've got sailors doing dumb things who need someone to remind them what shall means. My desk was just as I'd left it. A sticky note from my paralegal read, Welcome back. Try not to sue your family again. C. I laughed, tension easing. Days slipped back into familiar patterns. Briefings, client meetings, drafting opinions, making the case for fairness in rooms where rank and fear often tried to skew the scales. At night, in my small Norfolk apartment, I'd sit with Margaret's diary sometimes, rereading entries between emails and case law. Back in Maple Falls, the hardware stores ran with new managers I'd hired carefully. People who understood that Margaret's way of doing business had never been about squeezing pennies, but about being the kind of place people trusted. I split some of the income. A modest quarterly check went to my parents, enough for rent and groceries, not enough to fund another round of bad bets. They never asked for more. Slowly, tentatively, our phone calls shifted from stiff and defensive to something quieter. My mother started asking about my cases without turning them into material for stories. My father called once to ask how to apologize to a neighbor he'd snapped at, then seemed startled when I answered seriously. On my next trip home, he helped me carry bags in from the car without comment. We didn't hug. We didn't pretend the lawsuit hadn't happened. But we also didn't pretend it was the only thing that ever would. The house changed too. I replaced the carpet Margaret had always hated, painted the porch railings, repaired the wind chimes so they sang instead of clanked. In the garden, the bulbs I'd pushed into frozen ground back in November finally broke through in early spring. Tiny green shoots, stubborn and fragile. One morning, home on a long weekend, I stood on the porch in my service dress, cover tucked under my arm, ready to drive back to base. The bells from the church down the street floated through the cold air, muffled by distance and snow. I rested my fingers on the porch rail where Margaret had stood countless mornings, cup of coffee in hand, diary waiting on the table behind her. From here, I could see the hardware store sign peeking above the rooftops, the courthouse steeple, the route she'd driven to take me to school, the path my parents had driven away on, the same street I'd driven down in uniform coming home to a lawsuit. Now, all of it sat under a thin layer of snow, quiet, waiting. I thought about the judge's words, about how like kindnesses Margaret had given out to people who'd never know their names were in her will only as stories, about the way she'd trusted me not to let $4.7 million turn me into the thing she'd protected me from. Justice, she'd written, was not a moment. It was a way of living. I straightened my coat, feeling the familiar weight of the JAG insignia over my heart. I carried 2 commissions now. One from the United States Navy, authorizing me to serve, to interpret, to defend. One from a woman with ink-stained fingers and a quiet laugh, authorizing me to carry forward a legacy she'd built nail by nail, dollar by dollar, choice by painful choice. Both required the same thing. Show up, tell the truth, carry the weight. The wind snuck under my collar. I smiled into it anyway. "All right, Grandma," I murmured. "You handled your part, I'll handle mine." The wind chimes answered with a clear, simple note. I stepped off the porch, boots crunching in the snow, heading toward my car. Not the past, not the courtroom, but whatever came next. Blood had started my story. But in the end, it was the woman who stayed and the uniform I chose that decided where justice landed. Justice doesn't always follow bloodlines. It follows the ones who stay.